Let's now bring you the big focus story of this newscast. We are going to get you the details of what's happening in Sri Lanka. Remember, in the latest that we are tracking, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has fled Sri Lanka to neighbouring Maldives. Sources say to Mirror Now that Gotabaya can head for any place from Maldives. It could be Singapore, it could be Dubai, or even India. Sri Lanka's speaker has announced Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe as the acting president. However, the opposition has contested this move as Rajapaksa is yet to resign from the top position. As per sources, the speaker has been assured by the president that he will resign today and the new president will be elected on the 20th of July. Meanwhile, a state of emergency has been declared as protests continue unabated. The protesters have occupied the PM's official residence. The PMO is under siege. In fact, thousands of protesters stormed the streets of Colombo amid heavy security to control the crowds. Cops fired tear gas. 120 Sri Lankan-bound planes have landed in Kerala amid unrest in the island nation. So let me welcome, joining us here in the program, Mr. Jehan Pereira, Executive Director of the National Peace Council of Sri Lanka. Mr. Pereira, thank you so much for joining us. A very good evening to you. And thanks very much for giving us your time. Let me begin by asking you, since there is so much that we are seeing through media channels, from your understanding, sir, at the moment, we see that here is a country that is being abandoned ruthlessly by its own leadership. President Gotabaya, after all the statements coming in that he is very much in Sri Lanka, has managed to escape, much like what happened in Afghanistan. Who exactly is in charge now, Mr. Pereira?
The person in charge and the leadership in charge is the Prime Minister. Prime Minister and government are in power at this time. And the Prime Minister has now taken on the role of acting president, though this is contested by the opposition parties and also by those who are protesting, because they feel that the Prime Minister, who is now the acting president, is also part of the problem that they want to get rid of. The president has left the country, but that is because his presidential house was overrun by protesters, and the military and the security forces were unable to stop that because the number of people protesting was too great, who were trying to break into the presidential house. And it was not just a ragtag bunch of people. It is not just youth, radical youth. We find that there are middle-class people, people from all parts of the country who really want a change in the government because they feel that this government, which was voted in 3 years ago with a big popular mandate, has run down the country. In fact, people believe, rightly or wrongly, that the Rajapaksas have robbed the country. And that is why the country has no dollars to import essential items such as fuel, petroleum, medicine, food. And we have had to rely a lot on India, for which we are very grateful. $3.5 billion worth of credit line India has given us. But now that has run out. And with it, the problems in the country have got worse.
Mr. Pereira, why are the Rajapakshas resisting a change of leadership? If that could be the beginning of a resolution of this crisis, do you believe that a change in leadership, a change of guard can immediately help matters? Or is it much more serious than that?
No, that is actually what is wanted. And in any other country, in any other democratic country, maybe a country that follows democratic norms more than we do in our part of the world, perhaps, leaders would have resigned for much less. They resign in countries like Japan. When a train goes off the tracks, the minister will resign. In Britain, Prime Minister Cameron resigned when his effort to keep Britain within the European Union failed. But in our country, when there is this massive economic collapse, when the president made enormous blunders such as ordering overnight the banning of chemical fertilizer and Sri Lanka transforming to organic agriculture overnight, which reduced the food crops by 50%. These are big mistakes. He should resign. And when there are such corruption allegations, when people are coming out in such large numbers, they should resign, but they have not resigned, perhaps because they love power so much, or they are frightened for their own futures because they know that if they resign and they are in this country...
But how can they plunge the entire country and the entire population into this kind of a crisis and yet cling to power? Isn't it a little incredible that the leadership there would cling to the power and position with this kind of a single-minded determination that let the whole country remain in dire straits, let there be this kind of uprising to the extent that people have barged into the presidential palace? I don't think, at least in my living memory, I have seen visuals of this nature, what is playing out in our screens right now. The entire country and its common people barging into a presidential palace, putting the Prime Minister's office under siege, and yet the leaders wouldn't budge. They're so determined to stay in power, first saying we will not flee, and then saying I will only I will only resign after I have a safe place of shelter. Is that the plan of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa?
Yes, it is. I mean, he didn't want to go. He didn't see the need to go, I guess. I guess they're so out of touch with reality also. And they're operating on the basis, the government's operating on the basis, well, we got a mandate from the people 3 years ago. We got 52% of the vote at the presidential election. We won almost 2/3 of the seats 3 years ago. But then they have messed up so badly that people want them to go. But they are saying, well, we have the mandate. We are the democratic elected leaders. We have our 5 years. And they're refusing to go. And that's why we are facing this terrible problem. There is a solution that has been offered with civil society, religious clergy, and opposition leaders also have said, and that is to form a small interim all-party government to get us over this immediate problem. The immediate problem, we don't have dollars in our country. We have to go to the IMF. We have to ask friendly countries like India to be generous to us. Do that for the next 3 to 6 months and then go for elections, because the mandate of 3 years ago has been nullified by these people's protests, by the problems in the country, by the failure of government. That's what we are asking for, and that's what we have still not been able to achieve.
Yes, in fact, I also want to ask you, of course, what you're saying is, there is a resolution in sight, but it would take for the leadership to budge. At the moment, it seems that there is a certain sense of obstinance almost, not to give up and, not to step down. But tell me, what is the ground situation with regards to supplies running out? People are going hungry. The UN World Food Programme says 9 out of 10 families are skipping meals or otherwise, surviving on humanitarian aid. Is that correct?
No, it is. I think it is very true, because what has happened in the last 4 or 5 months, the value of the rupee has halved. Inflation is halved in relation to the dollar, in relation to import. Inflation is running at 50 to 100%. That means people their incomes have halved. They have lost half of their savings in the last 4 to 6 months. And then there are these shortages. There are actual shortages of petrol. People are queuing up 3 to 6 kilometer lines of vehicles, of cars, of 3 wheels, of motorcycles. They stay for days, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days for petrol. And then when they finally get to the pump, the thing has run out of petrol, and then they have to stay again. So they're very angry. And of course, and the food is also it's expensive. There is food available. There is rice and vegetables and all, but the prices have doubled. So then people who are on fixed incomes can't and who are not very rich have to cut down on their eating.
Yes, and it seems even in the middle of this kind of a terrible crisis, the leadership is refusing to take responsibility, and what is worse, clinging to power, even as the entire country has decided that they do not accept their leadership. Thank you so much, Mr. Jehan Pereira, for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.